Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, U.S.-Israeli hostage Edan Alexander has finally been freed, and he is reunited with his family in Israel after 584 days in Hamas captivity. The terror group made the surprise announcement just hours before handing Alexander over to the Red Cross. His parents raced back to Israel accompanied by U.S. hostage envoy Adam Boehler. They joined thousands of Israelis who flooded the streets to celebrate Edan's return home. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee praised the cooperative efforts of Israel and the United States, resulting in Edan's release from Hamas captivity. He also addressed the rumors of strained ties between Israel and the United States. Yochanan has more on that.
Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, addressed the rampant speculation of a rift between Israel and the United States. President Donald Trump made his first official trip to the Middle East last week, where he met with Arab leaders. News sites around the world reported that by leaving Israel off the itinerary, Trump slighted Jerusalem. This sparked numerous unfounded reports of tensions between Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. However, Ambassador Huckabee was quick to point out that President Trump has spent more time with Netanyahu than he has with any other world leader. The American diplomat insisted that Donald Trump has Israel's back. Huckabee also had words of warning for Iran and its terror proxies in the Middle East. He said there are over 700,000 U.S. citizens in Israel, and any threat to the Jewish state endangers these Americans.
Jerusalem has announced the recovery of the remains of Sergeant First Class Zvi Feldman from Syria nearly 43 years after he fell in battle in Lebanon. In 1982, the IDF battled Syrian forces in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. 21 IDF soldiers were killed in the fight, and the bodies of 3 Israeli soldiers were taken into Syria. In 2019, Russian special forces acting on Israeli intelligence recovered the remains of Sergeant First Class Zachary Baumel. Last week, the IDF announced that after a complex, covert, and dangerous operation into the heart of Syria, it had repatriated the remains of Zvi Feldman. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally delivered the news to the fallen soldier's family, saying for decades Zvi was missing, but the efforts to locate him, along with other missing soldiers, never ceased for a moment. Netanyahu vowed that the Jewish state will continue its efforts until all of Israel's missing operatives are returned.
Nearly half of Gazans say they would accept Israel's assistance to flee the Hamas-run enclave. A poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research reveals that 49% of Gazans are prepared to enlist Israel's help to emigrate. This study is supported by similar surveys. In March, the British Daily Telegraph reported that 52% of Gazans would leave voluntarily. And another poll by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy reflects that 60% of Gazans are open to emigration.
Dozens of members of the House and Senate have backed legislation calling to halt funding to organizations that hold expanded recognition of the Palestinian Authority. Idaho's Senator and Chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Jim Rich, introduced the No Official Palestine Entry, or NOPE Act. This bill aims to reinforce existing regulations that prevent U.S. taxpayer dollars from funding entities that elevate the PLO's status, namely the United Nations. This comes on the heels of the submission of the Stand with Israel Act, requiring halting U.S. funding to UN agencies that expel, downgrade, suspend, or otherwise restrict the participation of the State of Israel.
A delegation from Israel's foreign ministry visited Japan recently to strengthen ties with the Asian nation. Japan has the world's 4th largest economy and is a member of the G7. Tokyo is a powerful friend of Jerusalem and supports Israel's right to self-defense. It has implemented sanctions against Hamas leaders and has demanded the immediate, unconditional release of the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7, 2023. Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar met with his Japanese counterpart, Takeshi Aoya. He conveyed Israel's deep appreciation for Japan's support after the Hamas attack and the wars that followed. He said Israel and Japan are two ancient nations with glorious traditions and promising futures. He added that Israel looks forward to further strengthening the relationship.
The vast majority of Americans support Israel in its fight against Hamas. According to a recent Harvard Capps-Harris poll, 77% of voters back the Jewish state in its war against the Iranian-backed terror group in Gaza. The survey revealed that 8 out of 10 Americans want Iran's nuclear weapons facilities to be destroyed, and 57% say they believe that the United States should support Israel in attacking the hardline Islamic Republic.
The Israeli Knesset has voted to approve measures to prevent the Palestinian Authority from taking over the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. More than a decade ago, the PA began implementing the Fayed plan that aims to steal large plots of Israeli land through illegal building. It has used international funds to construct ghost towns throughout Judea and Samaria in order to put facts on the ground. Defense Minister Israel Katz praised the Knesset's decision to nullify the PA's unlawful seizure of territory. He stressed that the State of Israel will not allow the Palestinian Authority to use illegal construction as a tool to create strategic threats to the Jewish communities. He said curbing this illegal land appropriation will lead to strengthening and expanding Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria that serve as a defensive shield for population centers in the heart of Israel.
The European Parliament has passed a resolution calling to halt EU funding to the Palestinian Authority for its continued use of curriculum that vilifies Israel and incites terrorism. This is the 6th consecutive year that the PA has been condemned by the EU Forum for its use of textbooks that instigate violence by glorifying Islamic terrorism and martyrdom. Last year, the European Commission agreed to freeze funding to the Palestinian Authority, but it did not enforce the ruling. Meanwhile, the PA continues to use textbooks filled with lies, violence, and anti-Semitic tropes to brainwash Arab youth.
Israeli authorities have announced new excavations at the biblical site of Shomron. This city served as the capital of ancient Israel during the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. It was ultimately renamed Sebastia by King Herod in honor of Emperor Augustus. The area covers at least 10 periods of history. It was home to a Crusader church, a Roman city, and the remnants of the palace of the biblical king Omri, who ruled ancient Israel from Shomron. It's also believed by some to be the burial place of John the Baptist. The archaeological site is located a few miles west of the biblical city of Shechem and the modern Arab city of Nablus. It has been repeatedly desecrated and looted over the years. Now, the Israeli Knesset has approved a $9 million investment to excavate and restore this ancient city and make sure it's safe and accessible to tourists.
The Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, in coordination with the March of Life, held an important symposium on combating anti-Semitism in Israel's parliament. March of Life brought 300 Christians to Jerusalem from 15 nations to stand in solidarity with Israel. This German Christian organization is committed to Holocaust remembrance and the fight against modern-day anti-Semitism. KCAC co-chair Moshe Tur-Paz hosted the event, and Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Shikli, delivered the keynote address. Tur-Paz hailed the partnership between the KCAC and March of Life, saying, "We see how faith-based diplomacy and shared moral values can unite people from across the world in standing against anti-Semitism and supporting the Jewish state."
Israelis welcome the news that Rosh HaNikra, otherwise known as the Pearl of Northern Israel, has finally reopened to the public. On October 8, 2023, Hezbollah terrorists joined the Hamas war on the Jewish state. The Iranian terror proxy launched explosive drones and fired thousands of missiles into Israel, prompting the IDF to establish a full military base at Rosh HaNikra. This spectacular site is located near the Lebanese border and is known for its white chalk cliff face and breathtaking grottos that lead to tunnels more than 200 meters long. The Israeli islands of Shafaf, Techelet, and Nachlieli can be found just off the shores of Rosh Hanikra. This beautiful area was damaged during the war, but has been repaired and is now officially open to tourists. Local residents hope that Rosh Hanikra will once again serve as a magnet to bring crowds back to the Western Galilee. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. We're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Sondra Baras. She is the founder of Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. Sondra, thank you for being on the show.
A pleasure.
Sondra, tell our viewers a little about what is Christian Friends of Israeli Communities.
Well, I've lived in Judea and Samaria for a very long time, coming on 40 years. And at some point, always an activist, always working to raise awareness. And at some point, I realized that there's a whole audience out there that I have to say most people at the time in Judea and Samaria had no idea about them, and that's Christian Zionists. And so we started back in 1998, and the whole idea was to reach out to Christians all over the world who are connected to the Bible, who love Israel, and to say, this is Judea and Samaria. This is what people say is the West Bank. Do you realize it's the same thing? And we've been raising awareness and support for Judea and Samaria ever since.
We've been friends for over 20 years, and we've been pioneers in reaching out to Christians together. But today, Christian support for Israel is the most important thing for Israel. It's become incredibly strategic to have Christian support. Why is Christian support so important?
Well, for years, people in Israel assumed, well, we have our Jewish, diaspora. That's important support. But the Christians are millions, billions all over the world. Just their numbers are so significant. And then when you add to that the natural affinity they have for Israel because of their deep faith. They read the Bible, the same Bible that you and I are reading, and they see God promised the land of Israel to the Jewish people. End of story. So taking that deep faith, putting it together with their numbers and their influence in America, but not only in America, the combination is just amazing.
All we're hearing these days from Christians is they want sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. They want the statement from President Trump. They elected him for this moment, and they want sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Why is this so important to Christians?
Again, Christians are people of faith. And if the Bible says that God gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people, then the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. And in fact, and I don't know, you might be surprised, maybe not, you've been at this so long as well, Josh, how many Christians didn't realize that places like Shiloh, Hebron, Bethel are not part of sovereign Israel? And as soon as you make them aware of that, they scratch their heads and wonder, and they said, goodness, that has to be fixed. That has to be corrected. So I think what's happened recently is that we've together with others have really crossed that threshold of a certain number of Christians who suddenly realize the light bulb went off and they say, oh my gosh, of course this has to be Israel. Of course it has to be Israel because that's what God wants. It's as simple as that.
It's a very good explanation. I think that there's a lot to it, but there's also something to do with God's timing. God has a timing for his purpose under heaven. So the question is, why is now the time for sovereignty?
Well, I don't think we can ignore the fact that President Donald Trump is president of the United States. And the last time he was president, a lot was accomplished. We thought we were moving forward in Judea and Samaria as well with his plan of the century and all of that. It was a beginning. It was a wonderful start. And then things were more focused on Jerusalem. And then, unfortunately, he, lost the election. And now he's back. And that has created enormous anticipation in Israel.
We heard his plan for Gaza, to make Gaza great again, get the terror supporters out of there. make it a peaceful time. What's his solution then for Judea and Samaria? What would you like to see his solution be, at least?
I'm not sure which is the best plan. I do believe that just extending Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria is going to be a first and very significant step, that in and of itself will create a dynamic. Because one of the biggest problems we've had in Judea and Samaria, and today we're more than 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria. So you would have thought this already crosses a certain threshold. People are going to realize we're here to stay and whatever. But as long as people all over the world kept saying two-state solution, as long as important government leaders around the world kept holding out hope that Israel would indeed withdraw from Judea and Samaria at some point in time, there was nothing to move the Arabs along in Judea and Samaria to having to consider alternatives to this idea of it's ours and no one else's. Declaring sovereignty will be that watershed event. And I think that will create situations where we will have new ideas, the Arabs will have new ideas, and we're going to see a whole new reality.
Why are we even waiting for a green light from Washington? This is our land. God gave us this land. We're the Jewish people. We're back in our homeland. Why don't we just declare sovereignty?
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I'll tell you what I believe, though. An enormous missed opportunity, because after the Six-Day War, Israel just came in, and of course we were attacked. It was a defensive move, but we took over Judea and Samaria in days. And at that point, had we immediately, like we did in Jerusalem, immediately in a certain sense, but anyway, if we had immediately declared sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, I think that would have created a different reality than what we have today. But the very fact of our waffling on this issue created so much of the problems we have today. And unfortunately, the government of Israel, even today with a right-wing government, waffles a bit too much. And they're waiting to see what the United States is saying. Can they get away with it, I think, is what they're looking at.
Sondra, there are literally tens of millions of people watching our show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
I've been living in Samaria now for more than 40 years, and we need you. We need people like you, wonderful Christians who love the Bible, love God, to raise your voices and say, Judea and Samaria belongs to Israel. Join us at CFOIC.com and learn more.
Thank you, Sondra, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
The world is focused on the Gaza Strip, where 136 Israelis are still being held hostage by Hamas. Reports indicate that out of those 136, at least 30 are dead bodies being callously held by the terror group to use as bargaining chips. During the on-again, off-again negotiations, the Palestinian terror organization has demanded a ceasefire in Israel's defensive war. The conflict erupted following the genocidal attack by thousands of bloodthirsty Hamas fighters who invaded sovereign Israeli territory on October 7th, committing the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Ultimately, 1,200 people in Israel were murdered, 253 were taken hostage into Gaza. Women were violently raped, babies were beheaded, and families were burned alive. Afterwards, Palestinian civilians crossed the border, looting and destroying Jewish property. In November of 2023, Israel and Hamas agreed to a temporary ceasefire, which led to the release of more than 100 people being held captive.
During the pause in fighting, Israel agreed to release 3 terrorists for every 1 kidnapped woman or child. We were willing to make a temporary ceasefire in the middle of a defensive war, just so that we could bring back some of our women and children.
Following their release, many of the hostages said they had been beaten and held in inhumane conditions without needed medicine and barely any food. The negotiations were primarily conducted between representatives of Hamas and intermediaries from various countries, such as Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and the United States. These same nations are continuing their efforts to bring about another hostage swap. Hamas still holds Israeli hostages, including women and children, in desperate conditions. The fanatic Islamic organization has not permitted the International Red Cross to visit them or give them medication or any other necessities. This is strictly against international law. Many hostages need vital medications, and their families are worried that their loved ones are being denied their life-saving drugs. The ceasefire provided a respite between November 24th and December 1st as hostages were freed. Now, as tensions rise once again, calls for another round of negotiations echo throughout the region as family and friends urge government officials to bring their loved ones home. Among the 101 hostages believed to still be alive, 91 are Israeli citizens or hold dual citizenship, and at least 8 are Thai nationals. Palestinian terrorists are also holding the bodies of at least 30 individuals. 18 of them were murdered by Hamas during the October 7th attack. Their bodies were taken to Gaza. The youngest hostage in captivity is Kafir Bibas, who celebrated his first birthday on January 18th. Among the hostages, at least 14 are women between the ages of 18 and 39, including 5 who were serving in the Israeli army when abducted. 85 men, many of whom were serving in the IDF during the October 7th attack, remain in captivity. Some men watched as their wives and children were released in late November, knowing full well that they themselves would be forced to remain behind. A number of men are in their 70s and 80s. 32 of the hostages were abducted during the Nova Musical Festival massacre by Hamas terrorists. Out of that group, only 5 were released during the November truce. The rest remain in terrorist hands. The most recent point of contention lies in the terms of another ceasefire, which has been under negotiation for months. However, the rejection of the guidelines by Hamas has made achieving a temporary pause incredibly challenging. A major sticking point in the negotiations is the terror group's demand for a full, permanent ceasefire and the release of an exorbitant number of Palestinian prisoners with blood on their hands, which Israel has been hesitant to agree to. On one hand, Israel is determined to secure the release of its citizens, including vulnerable populations like older people and women and children who remain captive by Hamas. On the other hand, Hamas is using these hostages as leverage to negotiate its demands, which include the release of violent terrorists who will, in all likelihood, perpetrate more murderous attacks against Jews in the future. The IDF pushes ahead, determined to defeat Hamas and rescue the remaining hostages. Our thoughts are with the families, friends, and community members who await the return of their loved ones who remain in captivity, and with the families who have lost soldiers fighting the evil in Gaza. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Today we are in Moshav Tramim, which is close to Sderot. I'm here with a group of 23 people from all around the world that have decided to come, especially during this time, to stand with Israel and show it in like a practical way. So during the past about 10 days, we have renovated bomb shelters, we have cooked meals for the families of the hostages. We've also visited different places. We've done many different things, and today we're harvesting lemons.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
when October 7th happened, we took it personally. You know, we were heartbroken, and we were praying a lot about it, and I wanted to do something more than just pray. I wanted to put my prayers into action.
In this hard time, if we don't come to Israel or stand up for Israel, when should we do it? I have friends living down at the border, so it affected me very much. Not only as a Christian, but as a human being. I know one of them is hostage in Gaza.
This is a job for me. I like to work with my hands, and I like to work with people, so I give myself to a volunteer. I see Jewish people who still go on. They have a lot of pain in their heart, but they still go on, and they're so happy that we are here to help them.
Look at history. If we remain silenced, we'll be next. You know, and the problem is we already see this lesson from history. When the Christian church was silent, the Holocaust happened. Our stance needs to be bolder, our light needs to shine brighter, and we need to advocate for truth.
We have to come here, support the people, and make them understand that they are not alone. And when we come back to our home countries, we have more information, more strength to tell our co-workers, our friends, family members, neighbors about what we have seen here.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.